Silver Creek, Colorado Territory, summer 1883. When notorious outlaw James Jack Donovan pulled Catherine Whitmore from her burning home, saving her from flames that would claim everything she knew, the town didn't celebrate her survival. Instead, they whispered, Catherine, wife of Silver Creek's most powerful banker, had been rescued by the wrong kind of man, and the debt she owed him would cost more than anyone imagined. What began as a moment of mercy would become a testament to how some choices divide entire communities and how love can emerge from the ashes of everything you were told to believe. Chapter 1. Smoke and Salvation. The fire started on August 14th, 1883, just after midnight. Flames climbed the walls of the Whitmore mansion like vengeful spirits, hungry and quick. Most folks in Silver Creek learned about it from the bells. 3 hard clangs from the church tower that meant danger had arrived, and everyone needed to wake. Catherine Whitmore woke to smoke thick enough to choke on. Her bedroom filled with gray haze while heat pressed against the door like something alive trying to break through. She stumbled toward the window, coughing into her nightgown sleeve, but the glass wouldn't break. Her husband Edmund was in Denver on business. The servants had gone home for the evening, and she stood completely alone in a house, transforming into her tomb. The air grew thinner with each desperate breath. Catherine's vision blurred while her lungs burned from the inside out. She pounded on the window glass until her palms went numb, screaming into smoke that swallowed every sound. Below, townspeople gathered with buckets that seemed pathetically small against the inferno consuming the grandest house in Silver Creek. Then the bedroom door exploded inward. A figure moved through the smoke, tall, broad-shouldered, face covered with a bandana against the heat. He didn't ask permission or wait for gratitude. Strong arms wrapped around her waist and lifted her like she weighed nothing at all. Catherine felt herself pressed against a chest that smelled of leather and gunpowder while the stranger carried her through flames that licked at his boots. The stairs had collapsed, so he kicked through a second-story window instead. Glass shattered outward into the night. For one terrible moment, they hung suspended in empty air, then hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. The stranger rolled, taking the impact on his shoulder while keeping her protected against his chest. Catherine gasped for clean air while hands pulled her away from the burning house. Women wrapped blankets around her shoulders and pressed water to her lips. Through the chaos, she finally saw her rescuer clearly. James Donovan, the outlaw every lawman in 3 territories wanted dead or captured. He stood at the crowd's edge, silhouetted against the burning mansion. His dark hair hung past his collar. His jaw carried 3 days of stubble, and his eyes held the particular wariness of men who had learned to expect bullets instead of gratitude. A holster sat low on his hip, the revolver handle worn smooth from constant use. Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd with his hand already reaching for his weapon. But Catherine's fingers tightened on the sheriff's arm before he could draw. She explained in a smoke-roughened voice that this man had just saved her life. The sheriff's face twisted with frustration, but he couldn't arrest someone for heroism, no matter how badly he wanted to. Donovan's eyes met Catherine's for one brief moment. She saw something there she couldn't name, not expectation or demand, but a quiet acknowledgement that their lives had just become impossibly tangled. Then he turned and walked into the darkness beyond the firelight, disappearing like smoke himself, while the Whitmore mansion collapsed behind him in a shower of sparks that reached toward the stars. The townspeople murmured as they watched him vanish. Tomorrow, they would have opinions about what it meant that Catherine Whitmore owed her life to an outlaw. Tonight, they simply stared at the ruins of the grandest house in Silver Creek and wondered what would rise from the ashes. Catherine stood wrapped in borrowed blankets, coughing occasionally, watching flames consume everything she had called home. Her nightgown was torn and blackened. Soot covered her face and hands. But she was breathing, alive, saved by a man the world had decided didn't deserve redemption. When Edmund returned 3 days later, he found his wife staying at the boarding house, the mansion reduced to a charred skeleton, and the entire town buzzing with scandalous whispers about how she had been rescued. He listened to the story with his banker's face, carefully neutral revealing nothing. But Catherine saw how his jaw tightened when she spoke Donovan's name. That night, lying in a borrowed bed that smelled of lavender and mothballs, Catherine couldn't stop thinking about the stranger who had run a fire when everyone else stood safely outside. She didn't know why he had been near their house that night. Didn't know what business an outlaw had in Silver Creek's residential district after midnight. But she knew with absolute certainty that she would have died without him. And that knowledge changed something fundamental in how she understood the world. Chapter 2. The Debt. Edmund Whitmore rebuilt quickly. Within a month, construction crews swarmed the property, raising a new house from the ruins of the old one. The second mansion stood even taller than the first, a statement that fire couldn't destroy his power or position. But something had shifted in Catherine. She moved through the new rooms feeling like a guest in her own life. The servants treated her with careful kindness that felt like pity. Women at church smiled with tight lips while their eyes assessed her appearance for signs of corruption. Men tipped their hats with exaggerated formality, as if she had become fragile or dangerous. The whispers followed her through Silver Creek like persistent shadows. Why had an outlaw been near her home that night? Had she known he would be there? What kind of arrangement existed between the banker's wife and a wanted criminal? The questions carried venom wrapped in concern. Catherine discovered that being saved by the wrong person could be worse than not being saved at all. Invitations to social gatherings dried up. Former friends suddenly had pressing obligations when she approached. Even the minister's wife, who had once called Catherine her dearest companion, now offered tight smiles and quick excuses to avoid conversation. Edmund never asked if the rumors were true. Instead, he buried himself in bank business, spending longer hours at his office and returning home with increasing quantities of whiskey on his breath. The new house echoed with their careful silence. Two people living parallel lives under one roof, speaking only when necessary and never about what mattered most. 6 weeks after the fire, Catherine found a note slipped beneath the garden gate. The paper was rough, the handwriting unpracticed but deliberate. It contained only an address, an abandoned homestead 3 miles north of town, and a simple question: "Are you all right?" She should have burned it, should have shown Edmund and let him alert the sheriff. Instead, Catherine tucked the note into her dress pocket and carried it with her for 2 full days, feeling its presence like a coal burning against her ribs. On the 3rd day, she saddled her mare and rode north. The homestead sat weathered and forgotten, its windows dark, its porch sagging. Catherine tied her horse to a fence post and walked toward the house with her heart hammering against her sternum. Donovan stepped from the barn, startling her. He looked different in daylight, younger than she'd realized, maybe 35 at most. His face carried scars that told stories of violence survived, but his eyes held an unexpected gentleness when he asked again if she was all right. Catherine found herself speaking with an honesty she hadn't managed in weeks. She told him about the whispers, the isolation, the way her own husband looked through her instead of at her. She explained how being saved had somehow made her guilty, how gratitude had become suspicion, how her life had turned into something she no longer recognized. Donovan listened without interrupting. When she finally stopped talking, he offered her water from a canteen and an observation that cut straight through all her confusion. The town hadn't forgiven her for needing rescue from someone they considered beneath them. They would have preferred she died rather than owe her life to a man they decided had no value. The truth of his words settled over Catherine like a heavy cloak. She had been trying to win back approval from people who had already written her story without her permission. They had decided what her rescue meant, and nothing she did would change their narrative. She asked why he had saved her. Why risk capture, or worse for a stranger? Donovan's answer came simple and factual. He had been passing through, saw the flames, and heard her screaming. Walking away would have been easier, but he couldn't make himself do it. Some things mattered more than safety. They talked until shadows grew long across the prairie. Catherine learned that Donovan had been an outlaw for 7 years, since killing 3 men who murdered his sister. The law called it murder. He called it justice. Either way, he'd been running ever since, stealing what he needed to survive and never staying anywhere long enough to be caught. When Catherine finally rode back towards Silver Creek, something had shifted in her chest. She had spent weeks trying to shrink herself back into the shape the town wanted, apologizing for surviving in a way that embarrassed them. But talking with Donovan reminded her that she had done nothing wrong. Being saved by an outlaw didn't make her an outlaw too, no matter how desperately Silver Creek wanted to believe otherwise. That night, Edmund came home late and drunk. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom, looking at Catherine with eyes full of something between anger and pain. He asked if she had ridden north that day. Someone had seen her. Someone always saw everything in towns like Silver Creek. Catherine could have lied, should have lied. Instead, she told him the truth. She had gone to thank the man who saved her life. Edmund's face went pale, then red, then carefully blank. He turned and walked out without another word, sleeping in his study for the first time since they'd married 7 years earlier. Chapter 3. Choosing Exile. The next weeks brought a slow unraveling. Edmund barely spoke to Catherine except through servants carrying messages. The bank board held emergency meetings discussing his domestic situation and whether a man who couldn't control his wife deserved to manage the town's money. Social invitations stopped coming entirely. Catherine discovered that isolation could be a gift. Without the constant pressure of maintaining appearances, she began spending her days differently. She rode often, sometimes toward town, but more frequently toward the open prairie where the land stretched vast and indifferent to human judgment. Twice more she found notes at the garden gate, once asking if she needed anything, once simply stating that he was leaving Colorado soon and wanted her to know she could survive without the town's approval. She was stronger than they gave her credit for. She should have felt relief at his departure. Instead, Catherine felt something closer to loss. Donovan was the only person in months who had spoken to her without calculation or judgment, the only one who seemed to value her survival more than his own reputation. The town's patience finally broke when Mrs. Henderson claimed she saw Catherine meeting with Donovan behind the church. It was a lie. Catherine had been home that entire afternoon. But truth mattered less than the story people wanted to believe. The minister's wife organized a women's meeting to discuss the scandal. They decided to formally request Catherine leave Silver Creek to protect the community's moral standing. Edmund received the delegation in his study. Catherine listened from the stairs while they explained that his wife's continued presence damaged everyone's reputation. They suggested Catherine visit relatives in the East, perhaps indefinitely, for the sake of the town, for the sake of his business, for the sake of decency itself. Edmund said nothing for a long time. Then he asked them to leave and not return. His voice carried no warmth, but it carried absolute finality. Whatever else had broken between them, he wouldn't let these people tell him what to do with his wife. That night, Catherine and Edmund spoke honestly for the first time in months. He explained that he wasn't a good man, not like people thought. The bank's success came from ventures that benefited him more than his depositors. He had built his reputation on carefully crafted lies about charity and community service. But he wouldn't pretend Catherine had done something wrong just to satisfy hypocrites who judge her for surviving. He offered her a choice. She could stay in Silver Creek, endure the whispers, and maintain the facade of their marriage. Or she could leave with enough money to start fresh somewhere the past didn't follow. He wouldn't stop her, wouldn't blame her, wouldn't even tell people the truth about why she left. Catherine sat with the weight of that decision. Staying meant slow suffocation, a life of locked doors and locked expectations, pretending to be grateful for survival while apologizing for the manner of her rescue. Leaving meant uncertainty, but also freedom. She asked Edmund what he would do if she left. He smiled without humor and said he'd probably drink himself to death within 5 years, having lost the one person who had ever seen past his careful performance. But that wasn't her responsibility. She had earned the right to choose her own path. The next morning, Catherine packed 2 small bags with practical clothes and essential possessions. She left behind the jewelry, the fine dresses, the crystal and silver that represented her old life. At the garden gate, she found one final note. Donovan was camped 15 miles west, planning to move north toward Montana territory. If she wanted a traveling companion, she was welcome. If she wanted to be left alone, he would disappear forever. Catherine stood at that gate for a long time, feeling the morning sun warm her face. Then she walked to the stable, saddled her mare, and rode west without looking back. She found Donovan's camp near a creek where cottonwoods provided shade. He stood when she arrived, surprise clear on his weathered face. Catherine dismounted and explained simply that she was leaving Silver Creek and would appreciate company for the first few days of travel. After that, they could part ways or continue together. Either way, she was done living for people who had already decided she was guilty of surviving wrong. Donovan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. They broke camp together, packed as few possessions, and turned their horses north toward country where nobody knew their names or cared about their history. Chapter 4. The Life They Built. Montana Territory welcomed them with indifference. Vast sky, endless grass, and small towns too focused on survival to waste energy on judgment. Catherine and Donovan traveled as brother and sister at first, then as husband and wife once they reached Helena, where nobody asked questions if your money was good. Catherine discovered she possessed practical skills her privileged upbringing had never required. She could mend clothes with steady stitches, cook over open fires, and navigate by stars when trails disappeared into darkness. Donovan taught her to shoot, to track game, to read weather in cloud formations. They became partners in the truest sense, two people learning to rely on each other because survival demanded it. They found work at a ranch outside Helena. Donovan hired on as a hand, while Catherine helped the rancher's wife with cooking and household management. The couple asked no questions about their past, caring only that the work got done and done well. For the first time in her life, Catherine felt the satisfaction of earning her keep through honest labor. Months passed into seasons. Winter brought snow that buried fences and forced everyone inside for weeks at a time. Spring brought new calves and planting. Summer brought long days of mending fences and harvesting hay. Through it all, Catherine and Donovan built something neither had expected, a life together that belonged to them rather than being shaped by other people's expectations. The attraction had always existed, but in Montana, it finally had space to grow. Catherine fell in love not with dramatic gestures, but with daily evidence of character. Donovan's gentleness with injured animals. His patience teaching her skills she needed. The way he listened when she talked about missing parts of her old life, while never suggesting she should return to it. One evening, sitting beside a fire while stars blazed overhead, Catherine asked about his sister, the woman whose death had started his outlaw years. Donovan spoke slowly, painfully, explaining that she had been 21, working as a schoolteacher, when three men decided she existed for their entertainment. The law called their assault, boys being boys, and refused to press charges. So Donovan had delivered justice the only way left to him. Catherine reached for his hand. She understood now why he had run into that burning house, because he couldn't stand by while someone suffered when he had power to help. That same instinct that had cost him everything was also what made him worth knowing. They married that autumn in a simple ceremony at the Helena courthouse. No guests, no celebration, just two people choosing each other with full knowledge of what that choice cost. The rancher and his wife stood as witnesses, offering congratulations without prying into details that didn't concern them. News from Colorado arrived occasionally through newspapers and traveling salesmen. Edmund Whitmore had sold his bank and moved to San Francisco, where his drinking problem became public knowledge. Silver Creek's economy had collapsed after the bank closure, with several prominent families losing everything. The righteous people who had demanded Catherine's exile now struggled with the consequences of driving away the woman who had kept their banker somewhat human. Catherine felt no satisfaction in their downfall. She had learned that revenge and justice were different things, and that sometimes the best response to judgment was simply living well despite it. Years accumulated like snowfall, quiet, persistent, transforming the landscape. Catherine and Donovan bought their own small ranch, raised horses, and built a house with their own hands. They had no children, but became known as the couple who took in young people escaping troubled situations. Runaways, orphans, those judged too harshly by towns too small. They found refuge in a house where the past mattered less than what you did with your future. Catherine never returned to Silver Creek, never sought forgiveness from people who had decided she deserved punishment for surviving. Instead, she built a life that proved them wrong simply by being full and meaningful and entirely her own. When they were old and the ranch had passed to younger hands, Catherine and Donovan sat on their porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold. She asked if he regretted any of it: the running, the isolation, the life they had built from ashes and judgment. Donovan's answer came simple and true. He regretted nothing except that the world had made choosing each other so difficult. The town never forgave them. Silver Creek held grudges like religion, passing down stories of the banker's wife who ran away with an outlaw, embellishing details with each retelling until the truth disappeared beneath layers of scandal. But forgiveness from people who had already decided you were guilty wasn't worth having anyway. What mattered was this: two people who refused to let other people's judgment define their worth. A house built on land nobody else wanted. A life constructed from courage and daily choice. And the knowledge that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected hands, and sometimes love grows best in places where nobody expects it to survive. They were buried side by side on their ranch, beneath cottonwoods they had planted decades earlier. The headstone carried both their names and one simple truth: they chose each other. That was enough. If this story of choosing love over judgment moved you, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Catherine's place. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.